Welcome to The Explainer, where we get right into the source material to break down the big issues. And today, we are diving into a really fascinating court hearing that pits two decorated police officers against the very city that fired them.
So, this is the big question at the heart of this entire legal battle. It's not really about guilt or innocence, at least not yet. It's about whether the process of firing someone can be so fundamentally flawed that a judge has to step in and say, whoa, hold on, essentially hitting rewind and forcing a city to put two officers back on the payroll. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll set the stage with this high-stakes legal fight. Then, we'll dig into the officer's side of the story, followed by the city's counterargument. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the four-part legal test the judge has to use. And finally, we'll look at the tough spot this puts the judge in. Okay, let's start with the core of what this hearing was all about. You've got two former high-ranking police officers, John Frey and Todd Dimmock, and they are in court asking for something pretty extraordinary. They aren't just suing for money. They want a judge to order the city to give them their jobs back right now. The legal tool they're trying to use here is called a preliminary injunction. You can think of it like an emergency brake. They're asking the judge to issue an immediate order to force the city to put them back on paid administrative leave while the whole appeal process plays out. Their argument is that the damage to their careers, to their reputations, is happening right now, and it just can't wait for the slow grind of the legal system. So what's the foundation of the officer's case? Well, it's built on a really powerful idea that the city didn't just fire them, but that in the process, it completely trampled its own rules and maybe even the Constitution itself. And their lawyer, he really spells it out. He's saying this isn't some simple employment dispute you can fix by writing a check. No, this is about the fundamental right to due process. That's the constitutional guarantee that you get a fair and proper procedure before the government can take away something important, like your job and your good name. Now, this timeline is where the officers lay out their evidence. They're basically saying, just look at the sequence of events here. It starts as a pretty narrow timekeeping issue, but then, right after they file a formal complaint against the city manager, boom, the investigation suddenly gets way bigger. New accusations pop up, key people are missing from the hearing, and the final termination letter doesn't even tell them how to appeal. So the big takeaway here is this alleged pattern of serious procedural screw-ups. The officers claim they were never even told who the original complainant was. The investigation blew up without any proper notice. And the real kicker, they say the person who made the final call to fire them was the very same city manager they had just filed a complaint against. I mean, that's what they're calling a massive conflict of interest. Okay, we've heard the officer's side. Now let's flip the coin and look at the city's defense. What's interesting is they don't really spend their time arguing about the procedure. Instead, they attack the very nature of what the officers are asking for, saying it's just legally out of bounds. The city's lawyer frames this whole thing as a legal nuclear option, a powerful tool that courts are supposed to use very, very carefully and only in the most extreme cases. Her point is that a typical firing, even a messy one, just doesn't rise to that level. And this slide, this right here, gets to the absolute heart of the legal disagreement. It's like they're speaking two different languages. The officers are saying, our constitutional rights were violated and you can't fix that with money. But the city is saying, look, this is an employment issue. If we messed up, they can sue us and we'll pay them back wages and damages later. In the eyes of the law, that's called an adequate remedy. So how does a judge decide who's right? Well, it's not based on a gut feeling. To grant this extraordinary remedy, the judge has to apply a very specific four-part legal test. So let's walk through this test. For the officers to get their jobs back immediately, they have to convince the judge on all four of these points. 1, that their injury is irreparable. 2, that their hardship outweighs any hardship for the city. 3, that giving them their jobs back is in the public's best interest. And 4, that they are very likely to win their case in the long run. Okay, first up, irreparable injury. It's a fancy term for harm that money just can't fix. For the officers, the argument is simple. When your constitutional rights are violated, that is the injury, and you can't put a price tag on it. The city, on the other hand, says any harm here is totally financial. Lost wages, lost benefits, and you can calculate all of that down to the penny and pay it out later. Next, the judge have to balance the hardships. Basically, who gets hurt more? The officers say, look, there's no real harm to the city. Just put us back on paid leave like we were before. But the city fires back, arguing that it's a huge burden to be forced by a court to reemploy two people they fired for serious reasons, including alleged time fraud.
Number 3 is the public interest. And here you see two totally competing ideas of what's best for the community. The officers argue that the public is always better off when the government is forced to play by its own rules. But the city argues that the public interest is in having a trustworthy police force, and that trust could be damaged if they have to reinstate officers fired over integrity issues.
And finally, the crystal ball factor, likelihood of success. The judge has to try and predict the future. The officers say their chances are great because the procedural violations are just so obvious. But the city makes a really sharp point here. They say, how can the judge possibly know who's going to win a case that hasn't even been filed yet?
All right, so after all of that back and forth, where does this leave the person who actually has to make the call? Let's get into our final section and look at the judge's dilemma, because he's caught right in the middle of all this.
At the end of the day, all the legalese, all the arguments, they all seem to boil down to this one single fundamental question, and it's one you could tell the judge himself was wrestling with. Can money ever truly make up for having your constitutional rights taken away? And this quote, which the judge shared from the bench, tells you everything you need to know about his hesitation. He seems deeply concerned about overstepping his authority. He's being asked to jump right into a city's internal business, and he's questioning whether he even has the power to do something so drastic, so early in the game. So, in the end, there was no dramatic courtroom decision. The judge took the matter under advisement, which is basically court speak for, I need to go think about this a lot. It leaves everyone, the officers, the city, and us, in suspense, waiting to see how a judge will ultimately balance a potentially trampled right against the very real limits of his own power.